I never imagined that the most profound shift in my later years would come from the man my daughter married. It was a revelation that altered the very fabric of our family, and more importantly, the way I viewed my own reflection in the mirror. It began with a gesture so small, a moment so fleeting, that had I been distracted, I might have missed it entirely. But that moment struck a match in the dark, igniting a journey none of us could have predicted. Before we begin, please remember to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city in the comments below. It really means the world to us. Now, settle in and enjoy the story. I have always been a woman of routine. At 78, I found comfort in the predictable my Earl Grey tea at 7, the tending of my rose bushes at 9, and the quiet solitude that wrapped around my house like a familiar blanket. My daughter, Sarah, had been married to Mark for nearly 5 years. I liked Mark. He was a good man, steady, successful, perhaps a bit reserved. He was in his early 50s, always polite, always arriving with a bottle of wine or a polite compliment. But I viewed him through the standard lens of a mother-in-law. He was the man who took care of my daughter. I never thought to look for the man beneath the suit. It all changed on a blustery Tuesday in late October. It was the kind of autumn day where the wind strips the trees bare and the rain feels like it's trying to get inside the house. Sarah and Mark had come over for a late lunch. Sarah was vibrant, her energy filling the room as she recounted a chaotic week at her law firm. Mark sat quietly, offering a smile here and there, slicing the roast chicken with surgical precision. I watched him, thinking he was simply a patient husband. I didn't realize he was observing everything, including me. After the meal, Sarah stepped into the foyer to handle a crisis with a client. Mark and I were left alone in the dining room. I began clearing the plates, the clatter of porcelain the only sound against the drumming rain. We usually stuck to safe topics, the weather, the traffic, the news. But as I reached for a serving dish, Mark stopped me. Not physically, but with his voice, Eleanor, he said, the tone lower and more grounded than I was used to. Do you ever feel like you've lived an entire lifetime that nobody bothers to ask about anymore? I froze, a linen napkin clutched in my hand. It wasn't the sort of question you ask while clearing crumbs. I turned to look at him. He wasn't looking at his phone or the window. He was looking right at me, with an intensity that caught me off guard. I tried to laugh it off. Mark, that's a heavy thought for a Tuesday afternoon. I deflected. He didn't smile. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. I'm serious, he said gently. We see you as the matriarch, the grandmother, the steady rock. But sometimes I wonder about the woman who existed before all those titles. I feel like she's still there, waiting to be invited into the conversation. For the first time in years, I felt a lump form in my throat. It was a shock to be truly seen, not as an old woman who needed help with groceries, but as a person with a history, a soul, and secrets, I suppose. I stammered, my voice softer than intended. I suppose we all bury parts of ourselves to fit the roles we're given. Maybe, Mark replied. But maybe we shouldn't. That brief exchange cracked the ice. We spent the next hour, until Sarah returned, talking not about family logistics, but about books we'd read and dreams we had abandoned. When they left that evening, the house didn't feel empty. It felt vibrant, echoing with the ghost of a real conversation. The following week, the dynamic shifted further. Sarah had to travel to the coast for a 10-day conference, leaving Mark to manage things at home. He insisted on coming over to help me paint the guest room, a project I had been putting off for a decade. I expected it to be a silent day of labor, but it became something else entirely. As we taped the edges and rolled the soft sage paint onto the walls, the silence between us wasn't awkward, it was companionable. I watched him work, methodical, unhurried, and noticed details I'd missed before. The way he hummed when he concentrated, the kindness in his eyes when he asked my opinion on the shade. When the sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across the floorboards, we sat on the drop cloths with mugs of coffee. I haven't felt this useful in a long time, I admitted, blowing on the steam rising from my cup. People stop expecting you to create things when you get to my age. They just expect you to maintain what's already there. Mark looked at me over the rim of his mug. That's a tragedy, Eleanor. You have a vision. You see the potential in this old house, in the garden, in people. I envy that. I felt a flush of warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. It was the warmth of validation. You give me too much credit, I whispered. No, he said firmly. I don't think you give yourself enough. In that moment, the barrier of son-in-law and mother-in-law dissolved. We were simply two spirits recognizing one another. I felt a fear prickle at the back of my neck, Fear that this fragile understanding would shatter. Fear that it was inappropriate to feel so understood by him. But his gaze was purely respectful, devoid of anything untoward, yet filled with a profound platonic intimacy. As the days of Sarah's absence turned into a week, our connection deepened. He would stop by after work, ostensibly to check on the furnace or move a heavy box, but we both knew he was there for the conversation. We moved from the present to the past. I pulled out dusty photo albums from the attic, showing him the woman I was in the 1960s, the one with the beehive hair and the wild ambition to paint in Paris. He treated those photos like sacred artifacts. "Look at that fire in your eyes," he pointed out one evening, tracing the edge of a black and white print. "It's still there, you know?" "I don't feel like it is," I confessed. "I feel faded." Mark reached out and, for a brief second, placed his hand over mine on the table. His skin was warm, his grip reassuring. "You aren't faded, Eleanor. You're just hidden, and it's an honor to find you." The air in the room grew heavy, charged with an emotion I couldn't name. It wasn't romance, it was something deeper, older. It was the relief of dropping a heavy mask I hadn't realized I was wearing. We sat in the quiet of the living room, the grandfather clock ticking in the hall, and for the first time in 20 years, I didn't feel lonely. The turning point came 2 days before Sarah was due back. It was evening, and the autumn chill had seeped into the house. Mark was helping me sort through a chaotic pile of old financial paperwork, a task that usually made me feel incompetent and old. But Mark made it feel like a team effort. As we filed the last document, I took off my reading glasses and rubbed my eyes. "Why are you doing this, Mark?" I asked suddenly. "You have a life. You have friends. Why spend your evenings with an old woman sorting receipts?" He stopped organizing the papers and turned his chair to face me fully. "Because," he said, his voice thick with sincerity, "you are the only person I can be quiet with, out there in the world, at work, even sometimes with Sarah. I have to be on. I have to perform. With you, I can just be. You listen to hear, not just to respond. That is a rare gift, Eleanor." His words struck me like a physical blow, soft and shattering. I realized then that the connection went both ways. I wasn't just a charity case for him, I provided him with a sanctuary. I didn't know. I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. "I didn't know I still had that to offer." "You have so much more than that," he said. We sat there as the twilight turned to night, sharing a silence that was more communicative than 1,000 words. I realized that love, real, human connection, doesn't always follow the family tree. It doesn't always look like what we expect. Sometimes, it looks like a rainy afternoon, a stack of tax forms, and 2 people finally being honest about who they are. When Sarah returned, the house was filled with her luggage and her stories of the coast. I watched Mark greet her, kissing her cheek, listening to her rapid-fire recounting of the conference. But then he caught my eye across the room. He gave a microscopic nod, a small, private smile that said, "I'm still here. We still have this." I didn't feel guilty. I felt expanded. In the months that followed, the dynamic of our family evolved. The foundation Mark and I built during that week didn't disappear. It became the bedrock of a richer family life. I stopped fading into the background at Sunday dinners. I spoke up, I shared my opinions, I laughed louder. And Mark was always there, backing me up, his eyes shining with that secret, shared respect. Sarah noticed the change too. "You seem so much younger lately, Mom," she said one day while we were gardening. "Lighter, somehow." "I suppose I am." I smiled, glancing at Mark, who was mowing the lawn nearby. I learned something profound that autumn. I learned that we are never too old to be discovered. I learned that intimacy isn't always about romance. Sometimes it's about witnessing another person's soul and saying, "I see you." Mark gave me the gift of being seen, and in return, I gave him a place to rest. Life has a way of surprising us, even when we think the final chapters are already written. It turns out, there is always room for a plot twist, for a new character development, and for a connection that changes everything. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched you, or if you've ever found connection in an unexpected place, please let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this one. Until next time, take care of each other.